I thought we would just start off with the refuge prayer and the four immeasurables, and I can share them from my screen. Hopefully, yeah, there we go. Um, can everyone see that?
Yes.
So this is I don't know. I'm going to ask you in a little bit, but I don't know if whether people are practicing Buddhists or if they're completely new to Buddhism. Uh, Either way, these are just some prayers to set the motivation and to get us in the right space to listen to teachings and engage in conversations and hopefully make this hour and a half as fruitful as possible. So I'm gonna lead the refuge prayer, and I think it's good that everyone is muted. Otherwise, we get a interesting cacophony uh, of voices. It's hard to keep the pace. But I'm going to read the refuge prayer one time in English and then two times in Tibetan, and then I will also read the four immeasurables prayer. So here we go. I took refuge until I'm enlightened in the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By my merits of generosity and so forth, may I become a Buddha to benefit transmigratory beings. Sangye Shedam Soki Shognam La Jang Shubadu Dagni Kyab Suchi Dagi Jin Soki Peso Nam Ki Drola Penshir Sangye Drupar Shog Sangye Shedam Soki Shognam La Jang Shubadu Dagni Kyab Suchi Dagi Jin Soki Peso Nam Ki Drola Penshir Sangye Druparsho. And then the four immeasurables. May all sentient beings have happiness and the causes of happiness. May all sentient beings be free from suffering and the causes of suffering. May all sentient beings never be separated from the happiness that knows no suffering. May all sentient beings abide in equanimity, free of attachment and hatred for those held close and distant. Okay, so and let's see if I can stop sharing that. Um, yeah, so also since this is the first session of four, I thought it would be nice to just hear a little bit about who's participating. And I'm aware that it might not be the same people over the four sessions, so some people will maybe come and go, but I thought it would be nice to at least just have everyone, if you're comfortable with it, say your name and maybe just a few words, no long life stories, but just a few words about your experience of Buddhism and the Dharma. If you're seasoned practitioners or if you're brand new to this stuff, it's just nice to for me to have a little bit of background of the people who's here. So yeah, so if you feel up for it, maybe just unmute yourself, say your name and a few words on your background.
Okay. My name's Lorna, and I live in Victoria, BC, Canada. And I've been probably studying and practicing now for about 6 or 7 years. I was introduced about 10 years ago, but after I listened to all the preliminary teachings from various different people, Venerable Rabina is the first Buddhist that I encountered, and because I could actually understand what she was talking about, it made a huge difference. Not that I hadn't tried to understand Buddhism before, but she spoke in terms and metaphors that, a Westerner can understand. So I got it pretty quickly, and then pretty much listened to just about anything else I could find, and got to a point where I wanted to make a commitment, and that's what I did. So.
Wonderful, thank you. Oops. I believe Benjamin's trying to say something, but is muted. Yes, there you go.
Can you hear me now?
Yep.
Okay, my name is Ben, and I live in Santa Fe near the Buddhist Center. And Venerable Robina hooked me into Buddhism, although I had been interested in Buddhism for many years. And I know some of the basics, but I don't know much about uh, the Buddhist perspective on the mind. So that's why I'm here. Uh, and I try to do my meditation, but I'm not I'm not a regular meditation practitioner, unfortunately, but I'm trying.
Yeah, there's a saying that a Buddhist is someone who's either meditating or having a bad conscience because they're not meditating. So
I'm the latter.
there you go. Thank you.
I'm Robert. I'm new to FPMT. I think I've been stalking you guys for a couple months watching. My background is mostly more Zen. Here in Gilbert, there isn't a lot of Gilbert, Arizona. There isn't a lot of Buddhists or anybody willing to even talk about this stuff. So that's my background. The religious part of it, I've been getting used to the taras and working through that. It's been quite amazing, especially with meditation, kind of relaxing into it. So it's kind of where I stand right now.
Thank you. You're unmuted, but for some reason we can't hear you, Zilla.
It's actually pronounced Shayla.
Oh, Shayla, sorry.
That's okay.
And thank you. Still can't. Yeah, maybe Shayla works out her technical difficulties and then we'll move on to the next person. No. All right, that's all good. If it seems like no one else is stepping up to share right now. So yeah, which is perfectly fine if it's technical issues or if people don't want to share, doesn't matter, but we could get back to that later potentially. So yeah, I'll just kick it off then. So my one of my main teachers is also Venerable Rubina. Back in 2004 or something, I took over this FPMT study group in Stockholm that later turned into a Buddhist center in 2017. And Venerable Rubina was one of the teachers who came there early and taught. This was when she was just traveling. She was lapping the earth several times per month. It seemed, just going around teaching and sharing her very down to earth and useful instructions. So that's since that has been one of my main teachers as well. So I think I try to make these teachings approachable. And I mean, there's a lot of technical terms in Buddhism and Tibetan Buddhism, and we'll get to all of that. We'll talk about, mental factors and more the technical aspects. But I also find that it's really important to be practical and pragmatic so that all these things are very applicable to our day-to-day life. And for me, there's nothing more important than actually understanding the mind so that we can work with it and transform it. The first time I realized I had a mind, in a sense, it might sound strange, but I have a background in IT, so I created this company with some friends, and I was, from a worldly sense, I was quite successful, and I just met my lovely wife Maria, whom I'm still married to. But so we were on this vacation in Thailand, and Marie had bought me a book called The Art of Happiness, where the Dalai Lama is being interviewed by a psychologist. And at this point, I had, especially when I was younger, I had this saying that was literally, if you think that money can't buy happiness, you simply don't know where to shop. So yeah, that was kind of where I was looking for fulfillment, was in the career and, achievements and buying stuff and all the rest of it. But anyway, so I was reading this book, and then I realized that a lot of the things that I was interested in, which was science. I have the science background, but also psychology, philosophy, and to a certain extent, religion. They all merged into this one extremely interesting thing that just captured me, was this feeling of really coming home to something. And the main takeaway for me from reading that book was that happiness and suffering are states of mind. So instead of running around looking for them in the outside, um, the only way to be sustainably happy and to work with, the things that torment us is to transform our mind. And also in this book, they presented all this science on, they studied the brains of monks and seen that they could cultivate their focus, and they can strengthen their ability to be more loving and kind and so on. So you could really transform the mind, which was just a novel concept to me. And so it made me turn my gaze 180 degrees and start looking at what was actually going on in my mind, and realizing, instead of, when I got upset with someone, I just thought they were an idiot. And of course I get upset. They're an idiot. But now I realize that no, I'm projecting that part onto that person. And then it's kind of bouncing back on me, and I'm getting upset, which seemed rather silly. It seemed like I was doing all of this to myself, and I wasn't even aware of it. I wasn't aware that this was this step in between. So here's the external reality, here's my perceptions, and in between was this filter of biases and conceptions and ideas, and I hadn't looked at that at all. So I got really interested at that point. So that's where we start. It's with this recognition that the mind is really primary. I don't know if you know the Dhammapada, which is one of the earliest texts with teachings from the Buddha. So, and the very first verse of that text says, all phenomena are preceded by mind, issue forth from mind, and consist of mind. And the translation there can differ, but sometimes it's mentation, which is the activities of the mind. But the idea is that everything we experience, it's in the mind, but Buddhism also goes beyond that, and it points to this intimate relationship between what we see as an external world and what's going on in our consciousness. So we'll get to this. Buddhism it doesn't deny that there is an external world. It just says that there's this interdependence, complete interdependence between what we experience as external and what we experience as internal, as objective and subjective. And then this goes deeper. If you look at some of the more esoteric types of Buddhism, what the Tibetans might call higher, but higher can be debated. But in the teachings of Dzogchen and Mahamudra, there's also sometimes the mind, or like the primordial nature of the mind, the clear light mind. It's sometimes called the all-creating sovereign. For example, Longchenpa says, primordial mind is the source of all appearances, known as the all-creating sovereign, because it spontaneously generates all phenomena without effort. And Padmasambhava, or Guru Rinpoche, says, primordial mind is the fundamental reality that gives rise to samsara and nirvana, transcending all conceptual limitations. So in all schools of Buddhism, from the most fundamental to the most esoteric, the primacy of the mind is emphasized. It's Buddhism is really about the mind, or as Venerable Rubina might say, the Buddha's expertise is the mind, and really nothing but the mind. But then the mind is everything, so that's where we need to start, and that's where we need to end, and that's where all the work is. That's the workshop, as Lama Yeshe said. So regardless of whether we, if our experience is this heavenly, amazing, conducive, wonderful thing, or whether we're having this hellish experience of torment and violence and suffering, it all ultimately originates from our mind. And there's, of course, two levels to that. One is more obvious, and that's, if something happens to us, we can interpret it differently, and we can look at it from various angles, and we can work with how we react to things that happen. So that it's pretty easy to see that the mind plays a role on that level. But Buddhism also says that it goes deeper than that, and the very reality that we experience is conditioned, and even, you might say, created by our mind. But well, we'll get to that. Yeah, so it's also then important to look at. So we live in this, era of wars. I don't. Probably it's not new for our times, but this is top of mind for people, and there's a lot of fear because there's a war in Ukraine, and there's a war in Gaza, and there's tens of other wars going on in the world, and there's the destruction of our environment with climate change, and the destruction of species, and the destruction of habitats, and there's social injustice and exploitation, and all these things are going on. So there's a lot of bad things out in the world, but the thing that we not always realize, that all of these things, all the bad things going on, are caused by undisciplined, untrained, out of control minds. So what's the cause of the war in Ukraine? Well, it's an uncontrolled mind filled with anger and jealousy and confusion. That's why there is a war in Ukraine. And then, of course, there's these external geopolitical whatever reasons, but ultimately it can all be traced back to the mind. And it's the same for the destruction we're wrecking on the planet, and the way we mistreat each other, racism, gender inequality, all of it all arises from the mind. And the culprit is anger, greed, confusion, jealousy, malice, malcontent, and so on and so forth. So the only, and unfortunately, in a sense, or fortunately, the only place we can start to change any of that is in the one mind that we have access to. It's I mean, it's all good to do the things in the external world, to give to charity, or get involved in politics, or fight for social justice, and all these things are great, but it's the only sustainable and the only thing that will actually work is to transform the mind, and we can only start with our own mind. And I think I'll try to pause every now and then, because I feel like I might go on a little bit of a rant, but I also want to just pause every now and then and make sure that whatever I'm saying makes sense. I don't know, or if there are any comments or questions as we go along. So I'll do that right now and see if are you agreeing this far? Does it make sense, or are there some objections arising in someone's mind, just checking in.
Well, and I think it's just, for me, it's important to recognize that the person whose mind is different from mine, that I want to say is delusional and all kinds of stuff, is mine is just as delusional as theirs. It's always good for me to remind myself that, because when you said something about the war in Ukraine, and my first thought was to put that about Putin, but then I thought, okay, let's put that on all, let's do that with all kinds of other people who put things into play that help Putin do what he did, or see things the way he saw them. And so it's important for me to always bring it back to me, as
Yeah.
you said, because I only have the potential to change one mind, and that's mine.
Yeah, and that's enough work right there to change that one mind. Um, yes, so and that also um, brings us to I'm trying to, so this section is about like motivating us to do this work and to look at the mind in the first place. And what you just said, it ties into another aspect of this, which is like the fundamental driving principle, at least of Mahayana Buddhism, which is the Bodhisattva ideal, and this idea of wanting to help others. So that's we hopefully we have this inclination to be of benefit and help others, and we see that others suffer just as much as we do, and a lot of times more. And then when we start to realize that this suffering also stems from misunderstandings and mental afflictions and so on, so then we just naturally want to help. But unless we work on our own minds and transform them, put them, under at least a measure of control, and then do the work of becoming more and more awake and moving towards eventually the qualities of a Buddha and enlightenment and all these amazing things. Unless we do that, we'll be in a terrible position to help anyone. We can't even start to help ourselves. And as soon as we try to actually help someone, we end up just making a mess of it. Our intentions might be good, but we screw it up because we don't have the necessary tools and requirements to actually help anyone. So that's also why it's so fundamental to do this work of understanding the mind, understanding what's in there, and applying the tools to start to transform it. And this, I saw this interview fairly recently with, so it was a discussion about the nature of consciousness. And so the Dalai Lama was asked what consciousness is, and he answered by specifically, he answered what a sentient being is, or what sentience means. So, and he said the definition of a sentient being is that being cares. So that's the fundamental level of having a mind, what the Tibetans call a sentient being a semchen, a mind haver. So anyone who has a mind cares, and it cares about different things. It might be just care about their own self-preservation, but it's certainly every sentient being cares about suffering and happiness. Every sentient being wants happiness, and they want to avoid suffering and pain. Problem is that we're completely confused about how to go about doing that. So we, instead of creating more happiness for ourselves, we end up just creating more misery and problems. But there is this fundamentally, all of us care. So that's what a sentient being is. And I don't know, if someone were to press me on what's the meaning of life, the eternal question, what is the meaning of life, this existence that we experience? I think the answer from Buddhism quite simply is that the very meaning of life is to rid ourselves of happiness, become happy, and then help others do that very same thing. And that's what's encapsulated in the Bodhisattva ideal. It's just that the Bodhisattva ideal is completely vast, because it's this idea of saving all sentient beings, numberless, not beyond trillions and millions and billions of them, from their suffering, and bring them to this perfect state of enlightenment. And that could seem like a pretty daunting task, but again, it all comes back to exactly right here, right now, and understanding and working with this mind that we are experiencing right now. So again, from the Dhammapada, another verse where the Buddha summarizes the entirety of the teachings, and he says, avoid harmful actions, engage in beneficial actions, and train your own mind. This is the teachings of the Buddhas. So from this understanding that our mind creates the entirety of the world we experience, then, and that being true for every other sentient being as well, then understanding, transforming, and putting the mind under at least a measure of control becomes supremely important. So so then we come to a really interesting question, and this is a point of contention, you might say, between Buddhist teachings and modern science. So for, I don't know if it's 30 years by now, something like that, the Dalai Lama founded something called the Mind and Life Institute, where he started engaging in this dialogue with scientists. And these were, physicists and cosmologists and psychologists and neurologists and so on. And this has expanded, and from these conversations, a lot of research has sprung, and countless books, and it has really been influential on things like how mindfulness and compassion and so on has been incorporated into Western medicine, Western psychology, and also more recently, into, at least to an extent, into the understanding that modern physicists have on the very basic fundamental nature of reality. Because for 400 years, science has been looking outward, starting with Galileo and his little telescope looking at the stars, and then realizing the sun goes around the earth, or sorry, the earth goes around the sun rather than the other way around. And the whole scientific endeavor, moving up to Newton and then Einstein and so on. And it's been just stunningly successful, the scientific project. It's given us all the amazing medicines and our technology, our cell phones and our electric cars and all these amazing things. And our understanding of physical reality has just deepened and deepened. But throughout this entire endeavor, there's never been any room really for the mind or consciousness, and there's never been any type of explanation. So from a scientific perspective, matter is foundational. So from, there was a big bang and planets formed and Earth formed, and then some kind of primordial soup, and then cells, and then amoebas, and so on and so forth, and then apes, and then us, and brains. And from brains come consciousness. And I mean, it's not like Buddhism is denying evolution, but it denies this description of conscious being this secondary phenomenon that just kind of pops out of brains when they become sufficiently sophisticated. That's not the view of Buddhism at all. Like I said, the view of Buddhism is that mind is primary, not the physical reality. And in the scientific worldview, where our mind is completely insignificant, we're, at the corner of a galaxy that's one of 4 trillion different other galaxies, and we're this little insignificant ape that just happens to have a mind that kind of pops out of the neural processes of our brains. But Buddhism completely flips that on its head and says it's the absolute other way around. And interestingly, the scientific consensus is that, as a neuroscientist would say that consciousness or the mind is what the brain does. There's a complete one-to-one correlation. Consciousness is the brain, the physical brain. But no one has ever been able to illustrate how consciousness would pop out of, the fat, electricity, and the stuff going on in the brain. There's no explanation, no hypothesis, nothing that would even, it's like, opening a bottle and a magic genie pops out. There's just as much explanation for how consciousness would arise out of the processes in the brain as there would be for that genie. But at the same time, it's completely accepted as true, or just as a proven truth, that consciousness is just what the brain does. Which, and this is a little aside, but this is really interesting. It could be something it could go in for another course. But of course, this also leads to the idea then that now we are about to create artificial consciousness. If we get, if ChatGPT just gets sufficiently sophisticated, then boom, consciousness is going to pop out of the machine, and we're going to have conscious machines. And it seems unlikely. And as long as science doesn't even have the beginning of an explanation to how something like that could happen, then I think they should not make statements that seem certain about it, because they really have no clue, and they're just making this metaphysical assumption that all there is to the universe is the physical matter, and consciousness is nothing more than that. So then, of course, according to Buddhism, mind is not a physical phenomena at all. It's non-physical. It arises. A moment of consciousness can only arise from a previous moment of consciousness, because it's not a physical phenomena at all. So just like, for example, if we take this cup, we can, as Rubina would say, we could trace the previous moment of the cup back. We know there's, some clay that's come to be the cup, and we can trace that clay back to the soil, and then back to when Earth was formed, and then back to where, stars exploded and created the fundamental building blocks of all this. So we can trace this trail of cause and effect back, and it's a physical cause and effect. But Buddhism says that the mind is not like that. A moment of consciousness can only arise from a previous moment of consciousness, and then that arises from a previous moment in consciousness, and so on and so forth. Which brings us back to the moment of conception, the first moment of consciousness in this life. And according to Buddhism, it brings us then back before that to a previous life. So there's this causal stream of consciousness that then merges with a causal stream of physicality or matter. And those two things together make up the human being that we are. And Buddhism doesn't deny that that the mind and the brain interact and correlate? Of course they do. Hit someone over the head and you affect their minds. Get them drunk, it affects their minds. But also, we know that thoughts can influence the physical. So, for example, if you give people drugs that are useless and they think that they actually are real drugs, that will affect them physically, which is called the placebo effect, which science has absolutely no explanation for. It's just this really weird thing that happens. But so we have thoughts and minds and emotions actually influencing the physical. So yeah, it goes both ways. The physical influences the mind influences the physical, but they aren't, it's not that the physical creates the mind. And it's also not that the mind creates the physical. They are different phenomena with different causal histories and streams, so to speak. And I think I'll pause again and see if there are any comments, or because this is often a strong point of contention for people, because we're steeped in this idea that the mind is what the brain does. The brain is everything. The physical, the stuff that's in here, that's who we are, literally. But so I don't know, what any thoughts or comments on this idea of a non-physical consciousness? Does it make sense?
Yeah, I like the analytical tact of like produces like, which is one of the rationales. So, humans produce humans, chickens produce chickens, we don't produce other things. So when you look at mind and brain, and of course, brain being mass, form, color, shape, and mind not being those things. Um, and also thoughts and feelings have no form, shape, color, or mass. So how can something like the brain, which has shape, form, color, mass, produce something that has no shape, form, color, and mass? So I like to meditate on that, because it helps me sort of get a better understanding of the differences using the like produces like argument.
Yeah, thank you. I think that is spot on. As there is one of the things that, and I'm sometimes I ask people who have a materialist worldview this question, and it's really hard to make them get it. But so the question I asked, if consciousness is a physical phenomenon, just like you said, then what are its physical properties? What's the weight? What's the location? What's the charge? What's the spin? What's, whatever. The consciousness obviously doesn't have any physical qualities. So how can it possibly be a physical phenomena?
Yeah.
But it's really hard. I think you need to have done a fair bit of meditation and actually contemplative, introspective work to even get the question. But I think it's a really good question to ask yourself, if not someone else. Maybe I should stop pestering my friends with that that particular question. But yeah, I think you hit the head on the nail there. Yes.
Yeah. You said one moment of consciousness gives rise to another moment of consciousness. But what about the very first moment of consciousness?
Yeah, so that's an excellent question. So according to Buddhism, so there's what people would usually maybe mean by the first moment of consciousness would be sometime after conception. So so that's, I mean, egg and sperm come together, and then people assume that at some point consciousness happens. So that would be the first moment of consciousness. But Buddhism doesn't assert that. It asserts that before conception, there was a previous moment of consciousness, which is the consciousness of what Buddhism calls a bardo being, or an in-between being. So we die and then we go into this in-between state, and then we notice, oh, there's a mom and dad that I like, and they're at it, so I'm going to go there, and then consciousness merges with the physicality of the sperm and egg, and that then turns into this being. So that wouldn't be a first moment of consciousness according to Buddhism, because then you come back to a previous life, and then that life, it might be a human life, it could be maybe I was an ant, or I don't know, sheep, or I could have been any number of different things. But that life started, and before that was a previous life, and consciousness traces back and back and back and back and back. So from a Buddhist perspective, the most interesting way to phrase that question about what's the first moment of consciousness would be like the literal first cause. If there's lives and lives and lives and lives tracing back, so how did all of that get started? And I don't know, is that more your question, like that first moment of consciousness?
Yes, and I guess leading to it, that maybe it's the mind that reincarnates, and then
Yeah.
and then along further, maybe on time for another, and then I'm getting confused between mind and consciousness. But in order to have consciousness, you have to have mind.
Yeah, and a lot of times they're just used completely synonymously, mind, conscious, and I'm getting to that part actually. So it's like, what is consciousness? What is mind? But
I can wait
yeah,
till you get to it.
yeah. But basically, I've been using them pretty much synonymously. Sometimes consciousness would refer to like these deeper levels of consciousness, what's sometimes called clear light mind or primordial mind. And then there's something called subtle mind, so subtle mind is what carries on from lifetime to lifetime. That's what kind of carries the karmic potential that we have, the seeds from all the actions we performed, which shapes how we perceive reality and also shapes the reality that we perceive. So that is like an unbroken stream that just flows from life to life. And also, we think that we're this permanent thing. So I'm born and then I die, but it's actually the same process in every moment. I'm reborn, I die and reborn in a sense every moment. There's nothing permanent that carries on. There's this process that happens, and underlying that is this fundamental level of mind, this stream of consciousness, you might say, that then get configured into this experience or that experience. So that stream of consciousness, it doesn't end when we die, and it also doesn't end, at least according to Mahayana Buddhism, it doesn't end when we get enlightened. So this underlying stream of consciousness is there for a Buddha as well. And so then the question that you did ask was, how did that start then? Like, what's the first moment of this unbroken stream of consciousness? And the very unsatisfactory answer to that question is, according to Buddhism, nothing can arise without a prior cause. So if there is a moment of consciousness, it was caused by a prior moment of consciousness. And that prior moment of consciousness was caused by a prior moment of consciousness, tracing back infinitely. So there was no start. It never started. which is extremely unsatisfactory. And and also when I say this, I might sound like I know what the hell I'm talking about. I have no idea what I'm talking about here.
But
I am,
couldn't you suggest that with the concept of time as well?
yeah,
I mean, and I actually find it not unsatisfactory. I actually find it quite satisfactory because it just opens up more possibility. I mean, to think that there was no beginning of time and that there is no end of time leaves everything pretty open, and just that, and sort of just kind of validates that cause and effect um concept that because there's no such thing as nothing, right?
yeah,
And and even with time, there had to have been a previous moment. You know, it's like the Dalai Lama says, Big Bang, no problem, just not the first one, because
yeah,
there had to have been a cause of the Big Bang. And then there
yeah,
had to be something that caused that cause to cause the Big Bang, and you could go on forever in that regard. So to me, mind and consciousness are kind of synonymous in that way.
yeah, definitely. And I mean, uh if your worldview is theistic, then if you believe in a creator God, then that person would say that no, the first cause was God. God created our consciousness and the universe. But the problem with that is then now you're stuck with the problem of explaining God. So where did this first mover come from? And I don't know, to an extent, take your pick and you know whatever makes most sense to you, go with that one because until we're enlightened, we're not going to know either way. Um, so that would be my take on it. Um,
That's helpful. Thank you.
yeah, and it's a question that I've asked many teachers, and I've pondered a lot myself. And so I think the problem we run into, and this again is maybe not exactly the topic of this class, but the problem we run into is that everything we experience, like time, like consciousness, like the physical reality, um, they are all what Buddhism called empty. So they arise from conceptual designation. So time exists fundamentally because we label it time. There's nothing to reality that exists independently, like objectively outside of our perception of it. So that doesn't mean that space and time doesn't exist, but even now in modern physics, they're starting to see that, yeah, maybe space-time doesn't really exist. It's like the expression of something that is more fundamental. And they keep looking
Curvature,
for, sorry, go ahead.
the curvature of space.
Yeah, so it's and we are experiencing those things, but ultimately they have no real independent existence, which means that um, and that's also so the ultimate goal of transforming our minds is to get to a state where we can experience reality directly beyond concepts, because the problem we run into is that concepts can't fully capture um, what reality is. So then, did consciousness begin? Did it not begin? Probably neither. Do things exist or not exist? Probably neither. It's more sophisticated than that, but we can't wrap our heads around that, and then we run into these paradoxes that can only be ultimately resolved by having this direct insight into reality, which is the ultimate goal of all meditations, all methods in Buddhism, to reach that state of um, seeing what a Buddha sees when a Buddha perceives reality. Um, yeah, so um, that's way out there. So I'll try to bring things back a little bit to to what's actually going on here and now. Uh, so I thought we would in a little bit, we're going to do a meditation. So just a meditation on the nature of mind. But I just wanted to fulfill my promise to talk a little bit more about what the mind actually is, or sorry, how it's defined in Buddhism. So basically, if you say consciousness or mind, it's this unbroken stream of, you can call it experiences. You can also call it, sometimes it's called appearances to mind. So there's sights and sounds and tactile sensations and all of these. So that's called this the five sense consciousnesses. We're experiencing those types of consciousness. And then Buddhism also posits a sixth kind of consciousness, which is mind consciousness, which is the way we perceive memories and thoughts and emotions and impulses and so on. And I'm a licensed psychologist, I have a degree in psychology, and I find it utterly fascinating that Western psychology doesn't posit this sixth mode of perception, because it's so obvious. They only talk, perception psychology only talks about what we see and hear and smell and taste and so on, but it never talks about what we perceive with the mind. But it's fairly obvious that we do perceive things with the mind, and when we're dreaming, we only perceive with the mind. So it's that's what the mind is, or at least at this what's called the gross level of mind, which is what we encounter in every day. So it's an unbroken stream of those six sense doors, as Buddhism calls it. And then, of course, we can direct our attention to, I can pay attention to what I'm hearing, or I can ruminate and so on and so forth. So we can kind of direct that experience. But that unbroken experience of mental moments or appearances to mind of experiences, that's what we're talking about here. And then also, so we have this gross level of mind, and then, like I said, there's a subtle level of mind, which is that unconfigured stream of consciousness that flows from life to life, that carries our karmic propensities and so on. And then below that, there is what's called very subtle mind, or clear light mind, or some traditions called it Rigpa. So that's the primordial, unconditioned mind. That's also can be referred to as Buddha nature. So, but yeah, we come back to that. But what we're interested in right now is mainly this top level of everyday life, this gross level of conditioned consciousness of this six sense doors, as they're called. And then as far as definition goes, and this is also interesting, because in Western science there's no agreed upon definition of consciousness. But if you ask at least a Tibetan teacher, they would say that the definition of mind is clear and knowing. So mind has those two defining characteristics of being clear and knowing. And then, of course, the question is, what does those words then mean? And the clear aspect of the mind simply means that that consciousness can arise in the aspect of its object. So just like a mirror can reflect anything, you can here's a red apple reflected in the mirror, or here's the tail of a dog reflected in the mirror, whatever. The same thing is true for the mind. So something can arise in the mind, like the image of a red apple, or the actual sight of a red apple, or the smell of a red apple, or for that, the memory of a red apple. So that's the clear aspect, that that consciousness expresses itself in the aspect of these different things. and that's also sometimes called the luminous aspect of the mind. So clear or luminous would be synonymous. And then the knowing aspect is that as this thing arises, it's also cognized, perceived, known, apprehended. We're being aware of it. So the knowing aspect of mind also sometimes called the cognizant aspects. So clear and knowing. Things arise, and then we can know them, we can be aware of them. And we talk about them like two distinct things, but they happen, they're like one moment, one thing. But we can talk about these two aspects of what's going on in the consciousness. Yeah, so I'll pause there again and just ask if there are any questions on any of these things, like the six sense doors or these two aspects of consciousness, clear and knowing. It makes sense? All good. And it's also, if you ask a neuroscientist, they would say that, if you're under general anesthesia, or if you're sleeping, dreamless sleep, or if you're, knocked unconscious, then they would say that consciousness ceases. So it stops. But from the Buddhist perspective, consciousness doesn't stop. It's just whatever is experienced in consciousness changes. And if you're in deep dreamless sleep, you're not experiencing much. Most people aren't. But then you have these yogis that can train in dream yoga, and maybe some of you have had experiences of lucid dreaming where you're in a dream, but you're aware of dreaming. And it seems like you can train the ability to also be aware in dreamless sleep. So you can be aware of being asleep and not dreaming, but you're vividly conscious of nothing basically then, because you're not much going on in dreamless sleep. But it's not like consciousness or awareness stopped. It's just that most of it are not aware of being in a coma or being asleep, or even, when we die. Definitely Western science would say that consciousness ceases when you die, but from a Buddhist perspective, you can be fully awake and go into the death process, follow the whole death process, and then emerge on the other side and be brilliantly awake through this whole experience. So there's this really interesting documentary, some of you might have seen it, called Tukdam, where they look into the phenomena of Buddhist masters sitting down in meditation, dying from a physical perspective, but from a Buddhist perspective, staying in meditation. So the body doesn't decay, sometimes for weeks. I heard a recent, one of my teachers, he stayed in Tukdam for a month. They kept delaying his sea burial because he was just sitting in this Tukdam meditation and not decomposing for a month. So from a Buddhist perspective, when a great master dies, it's no big thing. It's just, okay, I'm going to sit down in meditation and just embark on the next stage of this. Nothing to be afraid of. They can go in it completely consciously and be aware through the whole thing. So consciousness really is this unbroken stream. It's just that for ordinary people like myself, we're not, we sleep 8 hours per day, and there's complete unawareness. But that doesn't mean that consciousness goes away. It just means that we're so caught up in the gross level of consciousness that we can't even experience slightly more subtle levels of consciousness, like in sleep or dreamless sleep. Okay, so then this this meditation that I thought we'd do, it it invites us to look at, so if we can imagine our conscious awareness like this, like a stage, or sometimes it's called the space of awareness. So we're so fixated with the things that we experience in consciousness. Like again, maybe that red apple is really delicious, so we want a bite of it, or the chocolate cake, as Venerable Rubina would say. And we're fixated by our thoughts. They catch us and they take us on these wild rides because we're so preoccupied with whatever's these experiences, these appearances to mind. And we're so hypnotized by them that we don't ever pay attention to the very space in which they arise. So one really good metaphor for this is, and you might have heard it, is this clear blue open sky. That's the mind. But then in the sky, there are all these clouds arising, and some of them are really terrifying and dark and scary and move slowly, and some just, are moving quickly. But we're just completely caught up in the clouds to the extent that we don't even realize that there is a sky. And we identify with the clouds. We identify with the content of our minds. We think this thought, that's me, or this emotion, that's me. And we don't ever pay attention to this vast, open, clear, immutable, immovable space in which it all arises. And another metaphor that works for some people is imagining the stage of a theater. So you're sat in the audience and watching the stage, and there are props and actors and things are going on, and we're completely engaged. So whatever the actors experience, we feel it, and we're caught up in this play completely, to the extent that we forget that there's this stage up there, this open, empty, clear stage, and it's on that stage that all these things appear. So in this meditation, I'll just invite you to pay more attention to the space, the sky, the stage, and less attention to the content. I will actually start by just settling the mind a little bit by paying attention to the breath and just watching some of the things that pop into the mind, but then inviting you to kind of take a step back or ease into this more vast and open space that is the space of the mind, the space of awareness. Just to see if we can get a sense of what that space actually is and what the nature of that space might be. So, all right. So before we go into that meditation, I'm gonna check in again and see if there are any questions, comments, objections on any of that part. I seem to have stunned everyone into silence. No, I hope this means that it was all clear. Otherwise, we're in trouble.
It was very clear.
Okay, thank you. Because when this happens, when no one says anything, it either means that no one has gotten any of it, and or it means that it was actually came across clearly. So it's good to check. All right, so let's do a little bit of meditation on the nature of the mind. So I will invite you to just sit comfortably. And for this meditation, uh, it's actually very beneficial to keep the eyes open, because it's when we close our eyes, we kind of strengthen this idea that we have that the mind is somewhere inside the head. But if we open the eyes, then we also get the full experience of visual appearances and so on, which is just, again, part of the appearances to the mind. But having said that, it can be, for some people, it can be a bit confusing and overwhelming to have the eyes open, so then you can close them. And I will keep my own eyes closed because I feel that would be helpful for me to lead this meditation. But just know that the suggestion, if you can at least move into that eventually, is to keep the eyes at least slightly open to let some light in. And then sitting just in a posture that embodies alertness. So this is about becoming awake and alert and aware. So sitting in a way where the chest is open, the back is straight. But at the same time, we also want to relax as much as possible. So allowing the shoulders to drop down, just letting the hands rest where it feels comfortable. And that's also where we can start, by allowing ourselves to relax and dropping our attention, our awareness just into the body, noticing the sensations specifically of the breathing. And just notice how it actually feels to breathe. You can also emphasize the out breath. So as you breathe out, you allow yourself to relax, to release, let go, to soften. And if you want, you can, as you breathe in, you can emphasize wakefulness and clarity, alertness. So breathing in, becoming alert, focused. And then breathing out, releasing, letting go, relaxing. And then you can just let go of the focus specifically on the breath. And allow your awareness to become more broad, open, panoramic. And notice all the different things that are going on in the mind. So the sounds, like the sound of my voice, tactile sensations in the body, regardless of they're comfortable or uncomfortable. Maybe you're experiencing some pain or discomfort somewhere in the body. Just notice everything that arises in the mind. And also, of course, including thoughts, mental images, memories. As you might have noticed, even if we try to focus specifically on the breath, then it doesn't take long until a thought would just pop up and capture our attention and pull us away. So see if you can take that metaphorical step back, like lying in the grass and watching the wide open sky, or like sitting in the audience and watching that theater stage. And whatever appears, you just watch it, look at it, investigate it without getting caught up, recognizing thoughts as thoughts and sounds as sounds, tactile sensations as tactile sensations. And also notice as you go through life, this, what you're experiencing right now, that's all you ever have access to. The entire world, with all its sentient inhabitants, other people, other planets, and whatever it is, Higgs boson, all the things that can be known and experienced, they will appear on this stage. They will appear in your mind. This is all you will ever experience. Everything lies here in this field of awareness. And appearances change. They change from moment to moment, and they can be a vast range of different things, but they all appear in the mind. This is where you experience love, generosity, compassion, contentment. And it's also where you experience jealousy, discontent, irritation, malice, fear. Those things are the clouds. And then I will ask you to see if you can, in a sense, disentangle from all those different appearances, the sounds, the thoughts, the sensations, and see if you can become aware of the very space in which they arise. the very space of the mind, the stage upon which all these actors appear. And if there's a question or an answer to the question, who you truly are, I think maybe the answer that comes closest is this very space, this very awareness that is luminous, open, centerless, boundless. See if you can tap into the nature of that clear blue, open, vast sky. And when you were, say, 5 years old, you had very different experience and thoughts and so on than the ones you're experiencing right now. But this clear, open space of awareness, it was exactly the same. It is not affected by what arises in the mind. It can never be tainted or tarnished or diminished in any way. Allow yourself to just rest in that openness, in that spaciousness, that vastness. And then towards the end of this meditation, I'll just ask you to bring your attention back to those tactile sensations again, becoming aware specifically of the movement of the breath, becoming aware of being embodied. And then I will suggest that as you go about your day, and I'm aware that there's more day left for me than for you on the other side of the planet, but today and tomorrow, as you go about your daily um, life, just see if you can sometimes just pause and bring your attention to this very space of the mind. So if you have just, it can be just a few moments, you're in line at the supermarket. So start by following a few breaths to center and focus the mind, calm yourself a little bit, and then see if you can take that step back. So all the concerns and worries and fears and plans and hopes and daily chores and all the things that are just swirling around in your mind, see if you can just take a step back and pay attention to the space of the mind instead and rest there. So those thoughts, they can do whatever they want. You don't need to be involved for a while. So just like fade into that clear blue open sky. Identify more with the sky than the clouds, thoughts. And then rest there for maybe 5 seconds or 10 seconds. It can be transformative to just have a few moments like that throughout the day, where you remind yourself of your true nature and unstick yourself from all the silly concerns and squabbles and strifes and the rest of it. Just tap into awareness itself and rest there for a few moments. And then as you do that more and more, it becomes more available, more accessible, and you might find that you can more naturally rest there and make decisions from that space. Live your life more and more from that space, and not being so caught up with the trappings of the conceptual mind that are absolutely endless and exhausting and sometimes terrifying. Okay, so with that, we can end this meditation and open up our eyes if we had them closed, and return our attention to the rest of this session. Okay, so we got 5-6 more minutes. So I'm just going to open up the floor and see if there are any concluding remarks or remaining questions or comments, whatever.
I just love your metaphor of the mind is the clear blue sky, and the clouds is just the thoughts that kind of disturb us. I live in New Mexico. We get lots of blue sky, so it's an easy image for me. Thank you.
Welcome. And the Tibetans, if you have access to a vast open blue sky, you can do what the meditations called sky gazing that the Tibetans do. So just visually actually experience a clear blue open sky and make that like the foundation of a meditation. That can be quite powerful as well.
Thank you.
Martin,
Yeah.
you said that probably going to say it wrong, but you said that you can kind of pick a creator God, you can pick an infinite consciousness, that before there was a big bang, there was another bang, and so on and so forth. Or things came out of nowhere.
Yeah.
Right. And all three require a faith statement.
Yeah.
How do in Buddha, outside of just saying the Buddha said it, so therefore it must be true, what can you do to try and see the Buddha's view of infinite past consciousness is what can you do to shift your frame so that that becomes the frame of your own reality?
Yeah, that's an excellent question, and so
Maybe
to
that's
an
the topic
extent.
of the course, but
Sorry.
and maybe that's the topic of the course.
Yeah, that could have been the subtitle for the course, I think. But yeah, so the in a sense, Buddhist practice is about changing how we view reality.
Right.
And it's but at the same time, the Buddha was very clear that you shouldn't believe anything he said, anything, anyone says, or just because it's tradition or it's in a holy book, or even because it makes logical sense or anything like that. He implored us to put everything to the test. So of course you have to have some faith in the Buddha and his teachings, otherwise why bother? But it's like Rabina would say that, if you want to learn general relativity, you have to have some faith in Mr. Einstein. It's not like you're going to understand everything he's saying. You're going to have to start with 1 + 1 = 2. And it's the same with Buddhist practice. You start with the things that make sense, and then you investigate and you meditate, and you prove them in your own experience. Uh, and then you move from there. So yes, faith is like grounded faith is necessary, because you have to have some faith in the Buddha as a teacher, and you can look at, the lineage and current masters, and they seem like they're onto something, and then you have to start investigating. So what are they actually saying? Does it make sense? And then you just take it step by step from there, and the things that you can investigate and know the truth of in your own experience, that's what you build upon. Um, and yeah, so I don't know if that's good enough answer, but that's the only approach I'm familiar with.
I like your term grounded faith
Hmm.
because you ground your faith in something.
Yeah,
I have to make a faith statement, but is my faith grounded in science? Is it grounded in religion? Is it grounded in Christian religion, for example, or is it grounded in Buddhism?
yeah. And um, there's an excellent book by a teacher named Alan Wallace called it's something Contemplations from a Buddhist Skeptic, or something like that. The Buddhist Skeptic um, is in the title, and the whole idea of skepticism is to not believe in anything for which you don't have sufficient evidence. And I think that's a really, whether you're religious or not, it's a really good approach to take. If you feel that you have sufficient evidence for the beliefs you hold, then that's a good thing. If you can't find any evidence at all for the belief you hold, then maybe you should question that belief. Um, and, evidence comes in many shapes and forms, but make sure that you investigate, and make sure that you don't believe in anything just because it's dogma, or you grew up being fed it by someone else, or whatever the circumstance. Just ground it in your own experience, whatever it is that you believe, because your beliefs will guide your life and your actions, and um, so they're kind of important to get them as right as possible, and um, yeah, something like that.
Thank you.
Okay, that brings us to the end of this session. Thank you so much for joining. I hope some of that was helpful and made some sense. And we can end by dedicating. So when we contemplate these things, and when we work with our own minds, we generate wholesome mental states like insight or greater awareness and so on. So that all that positive energy that we've generated, we can just dedicate it to our own spiritual journey and our own awakening. May that be the cause for us waking up and seeing reality clearly and developing all positive qualities like love and compassion and so on. But we also dedicate it towards all others. So obviously, the people within our immediate circle, like our family, our friends, our community, but also to everyone beyond that. May this positive energy that was created, that was cultivated, may it be of benefit to everyone, not just humans, to all the suffering animals and all beings that are out there, whom are all suffering, whom all just want to be happy. So we dedicate whatever good came out of this session, we dedicate it towards that. And then, of course, I wish you a lovely evening and lovely week, and hopefully I'll see you again next Sunday, I guess. Yeah, Sunday for you, right? Yeah. See you. Thank you so
Great.
much.
Thank you, Martin.
Thank you.